Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, December 5th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. In November, voters in a Merced County town overwhelmingly voted to recall 2 city council members and to not re-elect their mayor. Many voters were also unhappy with the appointment of their city manager.
He had never worked in government. He had never held a high executive position, but he had 2 friends on the city council.
We'll hear about turmoil at Los Banos City Hall in just a few minutes, but first, today's headlines. The search is continuing for a convicted killer who escaped from custody in Delano this week. Cesar Hernandez evaded state prison officials during a scheduled visit to the Kern County Superior Court on Monday. Schools in Delano have closed, and Christmas events have been postponed as a safety precaution. On Wednesday, helicopters whirled overhead and authorities fanned out across neighborhoods. Several agencies are involved in the manhunt, and residents are urged to report suspicious activity immediately. Valley Democrats have managed to claim a congressional victory from November's elections. That's despite sweeping wins by Republican President-elect Donald Trump. On Tuesday, Democrat Adam Gray declared victory in the razor-thin U.S. House District 13 race. KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports how Gray pulled off the win in this rematch from 2022.
Gray beat his Republican opponent and incumbent in the race, John Duarte, by just under 200 votes. How did he do it? Tom Holyoke is a political science professor from Fresno State. He says Gray had more people on the ground overall.
Duarte and Gray were putting a lot of resources into ground organization, but Gray's were particularly good.
Holyoke says this typically comes handy in races that have low voter turnout, like this one. But Gray's victory could be attributed to other factors. For instance, Valley voters don't always strictly vote their party. Duarte's loss means Republicans have one less member in the very narrow House of Representatives.
This is not good for any kind of legislative plan that Donald Trump wants to put through Congress.
Meanwhile, Gray said on social media he's ready to get to work. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
Kern County Supervisor Leticia Perez will remain on the Board of Supervisors. That's after she eked out a victory over her challenger Kimberly Salas by just 133 votes. That's according to the latest and final update from the Kern County Elections Office. Perez thanked her constituents in District 5, which covers much of East Bakersfield. A new proposed California state bill would require state officials to track the environmental and financial impact of imported oil. SB 13 was introduced by State Senator Shannon Grove. It would require the State Air Resources Board to report the amount of particulate matter released into the air from the imports. It would also require the Energy Commission to break down taxes and fees associated with shipping oil into the state. Senator Grove says the bill would put California oil producers on an even playing field with foreign drillers. But getting the bill to Governor Newsom's desk is an uphill battle. Similar proposals have all failed in recent years. Fresno State's football program has hired USC's assistant head football coach to lead its program next season. ESPN is reporting that Matt Ince met with Fresno State leaders this week amid negotiations. Sources say the 2 parties are believed to be working out a 5-year deal. Ince previously led North Dakota State to 2 national championships over 5 seasons. Fresno State is set to enter the Pac-12 conference in 2026.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, with special holiday financing deals on select models through the end of the year at the new showroom on Blackstone and Barstow. Information at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. The city of Los Banos in Merced County has quadrupled in size since the 1980s, with over 48,000 residents calling it home today. This election cycle, voters decided to shake things up in a major way for their city government. 2 city council members and the mayor were ousted. But the question is why? I recently spoke with Mike Dunbar. He's a reporter with the Westside Express and has some answers to this question. Dunbar has extensively covered Los Banos City Hall. He's previously reported that for residents in Los Banos, the appointment of city manager Josh Pinero is a major sticking point. And today he's breaking down Pinero's winding tenure in Los Banos. A city manager is widely considered the top official in a city and is responsible for day-to-day operations. In my conversation with Dunbar, we won't cover nearly all the details about what's happening in Los Banos, but Dunbar starts by telling us about how Pinero got there and what happened next.
Josh is a hometown guy. He had never worked in government. He had never held a high executive position, but he had two friends on the city council, and those two convinced the other three, this was back in 2021, they convinced the other three to hire him as city manager. And he went about 8 months. There were undisclosed complaints about him. There were issues concerning his relations with other employees, with city employees, and you began to see people leaving the city. The finance director and the fire chief were the first two department heads. The city had, at that time, had 7 department heads, and they were the first two to leave. So that is what happened. The 3 remaining members of the city council finally decided they'd had enough, and they dismissed him. And that was sort of the beginning. The mayor at the time, Tom Faria, his kids had left the area, and he moved out of town and resigned as mayor. There were 2 others on the city council who were elected, and so you ended up with a new majority. You ended up with Paul Yanez coming in as mayor and Doug Begonia Jr. coming in as a city council person. With the 2 people on the council who had been there all along in his corner, now there were 4, and they rehired him.
Okay, so let's get this timeline straight. So he comes in October 2021, lasts about 8 months, is terminated through a simple majority.
In June of 2022.
Okay, I believe it's early 2023. This new reshaped city council is taking place, and Pinero is essentially brought back.
That's exactly right. It was in the January meeting when they hired him back. It might have been February, early February. But I think it was the last meeting in January where they brought him back.
With a raise, I believe you reported that this not only was this person who was fired brought back, he was then given more money.
He was given a raise, but that wasn't the most significant condition of his return. During the time, just before he was brought back, a lawyer working on his behalf sent a letter to the city demanding substantial payment for wrongful firing. He was dismissed under the general law contract. In other words, he wasn't due anything more, and he had no guarantee of employment if he lost the majority of the council. But the lawyer insisted that he was due, that he had been doing a great job, and that he was due compensation. I think she asked for like $6 million, something like that.
Wow.
He settled, and he got $1.8 million.
So, and that was a settlement. So did the city admit wrongdoing, or they just settled with Josh Pinero?
No. In fact, the city contacted its employment liability insurer, and they sent them a note saying, "What are you doing? You shouldn't pay this. We're not going to cover this." So they refused to pay it. So then the city hired an outside law firm outside of their own council, and the outside law firm also said, "You shouldn't pay this." But they paid it anyway. But now they had to pay it out of their general fund. And their discretionary money that was in their general fund was a total of about $18 million. So they spent a tenth of their entire general fund giving it to Josh Pinero, and then gave him a raise. And then, the worst part perhaps, they changed his contract to require a 5-0 vote to fire him.
So with all that happened, how did residents of Los Banos respond to that settlement and Josh Pinero being rehired?
Well, a lot of people were just outraged about the 1.8 million. And I think that is the number that just stood out to everyone. That's something everyone could grasp. The question being, what did he do to get 1.8 million? Why did he deserve 1.8 million of taxpayer dollars? And there's no answer to that.
And let's bring listeners up to speed with this latest election. There has been some pushback to what's been going on. 2 council members, Douglas Begonia and Brett Jones, were each recalled by their constituencies, with over 75% voting to recall each candidate. Additionally, Mayor Paul Yanez was not reelected, but 2 council members will remain. So what is next for Los Banos? Does it look like Josh Pinheiro could soon be out of a job under new leadership?
Well, I'm not sure what's next for Josh Pinheiro. The man who is going to replace Paul Yanez as mayor, Mike Dunbar, he served 6 terms as mayor of Los Banos previously. He's a very popular man. He runs a very popular restaurant in town. Jones and Begonia, as you said, were recalled. As soon as the votes are certified, they will be removed from office. They will not be allowed to sit on the city council because that's the way the recall votes work. So they will begin probably to start the appointment process.
Well, it sounds like the tide is turning potentially in Los Banos.
I would say it has.
So what are you going to be keeping an eye on? What's next for you, Mike, as you continue to follow this issue?
What I'm going to watch for basically is I'm going to see how the city apportions its managerial duties. I think there are problems in the city and how it's being managed. And it's going to be interesting to see if maybe the city council decides to reassign some of the duties away from the city manager. Because he does have this ironclad contract that requires a 5-0 vote to dismiss. And until they can renegotiate that contract, I don't see them being able to make a change at that level. So they're going to have their hands, I don't know about tied, but they're going to have to tread carefully. And I think Mike Dunbar, having served not only as mayor of Los Banos for 12 years, but on various state commissions, Mike's a savvy guy. And I have every faith that he will have an audit conducted because I think there might be something there that we can learn from how city business has been handled in the past couple of years.
And that was my conversation with Mike Dunbar. He's a reporter at the Westside Express newspaper in Los Banos, and he's covered the evolving nature of that city's government in the last 2 years. Last night, the Los Banos City Council met, and there was praise for the outgoing members. The City Council also decided to avoid a costly election and instead appoint new members to the vacant positions. Those appointments could come as early as January. And that does it for today. If you like what you've been hearing on Central Valley Daily, help the show by leaving a 5-star rating in your podcast app. Even better, share the podcast with a friend. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.